That's completely unnecessary. Hello? Hello. Hi.
Hello.
I'm saying this very slowly so our wonderful sound guy can test our sound. Hello?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you guys so much for being here. For how many of you is this your first ever time at one of our lectures?
Hey.
Oh, hi. Welcome, first timers.
That's speakeasy.
Yeah, and if you're tuning in from online, hello as well. You can watch these as recordings, so if you have a really great time tonight and you feel like you heard about someone fantastic and you want to send it to your friend, you can just link the video and spread that information. Thank you guys again for coming out. Thank you for getting vaccinated. If you haven't yet been fully vaccinated, now's the time. We're a history organization, so we believe polio doesn't exist because of vaccines, because that's true. So lots of diseases don't exist because of vaccines, so go get vaccinated. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Patty. I am the founder and executive director of Chicago for Chicagoans. We've been around since 2016, and all of our programming is pay what you can. So the mission of our organization is to be able to offer Chicago history programming to people who live here, and we don't think that you should have to pay for it if you can't afford it. So that's what we do. So if you can afford it, please find one of the many QR codes floating around the room that will show you how to give us money in a variety of ways. Woo! We accept, we accept cash, check, credit card, firstborn babies, Venmo, all the major credit cards, Diners Club, traveler's checks, any of the above. So again, the system works if those with financial comfort can make a donation to those who otherwise would not be able to attend. So we appreciate you guys contributing in any way, shape, or form. If you aren't comfortable enough to contribute tonight, you can always leave us a nice review online. That's pretty awesome too. I'm really stalling for time here because we have a couple of people waiting to get their drinks. Let's see what else I can talk about. This summer, we will be bringing back walking tours. We first started this organization with walking tours of Chicago neighborhoods. We will be doing that again this summer. We'll also be doing scavenger hunts this summer, which will be very fun. And we have a couple of tour guide trainings coming up. So those are free, kind of like half-day-ish, full-ish day sessions that you can come and learn some tips and tricks for how to be an awesome tour guide, or if you've never given a tour before, where to start. Or if you love researching but you're nervous about public speaking, you can come to those events and learn a little bit about it. And once you've completed our program, you can give lectures for us or tours. We want information to be accessible, and we want Chicagoans to feel empowered and comfortable sharing the history of their own city with their neighbors. So stay tuned. We'll have more information about that up soon. I do also, before we begin, want to remind you guys that next week we won't be here. No one will be here. Well, maybe the bartender. But next week we are taking a little break, so don't come next week. But the week after that, we'll be back with another presentation on another fabulous woman from Chicago history, Catherine Dexter McCormick. You can learn all about how she helped make birth control a thing, among other things. And you'll have some wild and crazy stories about the McCormicks. So, come on the 31st. That's the next day that we'll be here, and live streaming online as well. I think that's all I can possibly say to
What's
fill some
the
time.
venue?
Oh yes, this venue. Where are we? We're in room 13. Room 13 is a members-only speakeasy, and you too can be a member here. Make sure you tip your bartenders, because we all love alcohol and bartenders. Thank you. Yes. Awesome. All right. Without further ado, it is my supreme pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Tonight we have Erica Ruggiero, who will be speaking about the women who built Chicago. She is an architect. She's a preservationist. She is the president of our board of directors. Woo indeed. She helps us write strategic plans for our organization and helps us create a budget, and is part of our 5-person leadership team. And we're all women, so happy Women's Month.
Yes!
Happy Women's History Month! Yeah, with this organization, I do a lot, but Erica also busts some serious ass. So I could not do this without her, so I'm really excited for her to be able to take the mic and tell you guys all about things she likes to study, and I'm very excited to learn about. So give it up for Erica.
Yeah!
Yes, and as the person who does budgets for this organization, I do not want firstborn children. Sorry. I've seen the numbers. We can't afford it. No.
That's a good point.
Yeah, sorry. I go a little brain dead at times when I'm speaking, so I have some notes. But also, I just want to make sure, because we are going to be talking about, obviously, buildings and the women who designed and built those buildings. So does everyone have a PowerPoint printout?
Or a QR code.
Oh yeah, or Patty kindly put a QR code online.
They're floating around the room.
There's an extra one here if someone needs one.
You can share. Click the link in the description.
There's my lovely model sharing the PowerPoint.
Yes.
So as Patty mentioned, I am Erica Ruggiero. I'm an owner of a women-owned historic preservation architecture firm.
Woo!
Unfortunately, I'm not an architect, but I am a historic preservation specialist. So something like this topic and women who have preceded myself in this field, obviously near and dear to my heart. I got involved with this project, and I'll share a link later on how you can learn more about these women and other women across the state of Illinois and in Chicago at the end of the presentation. But I got involved because I'm currently service subcommittee chair of an organization called Skyline Council of Landmarks Illinois, which is a emerging professionals committee with Landmarks Illinois, which is the statewide advocacy group for historic preservation. And so as part of Skyline Council, we took on a project of documenting women architects, developers, interior designers, landscape architects, even women clients that were really influential in developing significant spaces and sites across the state. We've documented over 100 women that have contributed to the built environment in Illinois between 1879 and 1979. So we focused on a 100-year period, beginning with the first woman, kind of the first woman in Illinois that we know of, and ending in 1979, because the overall mission of kind of surveying and documenting this women is to create greater advocacy around preserving these places, because so many of them are, as we'll talk about a little bit later with Georgia Louise Harris Brown, so many women are not recognized. When a National Register nomination is being put together or a local landmark designation is being put together, they're not recognized, alongside the kind of the male architect who, is being kind of highlighted and celebrated. So we're going to focus on just a few women tonight, out of the 100 plus that worked, lived, got their start in Chicago. And hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about it, share it with your friends, and then, like I said, I'll have a link at the end on how you can find out more about these women and others across the state of Illinois. So if you have the slide in front of you, there is a quote at the bottom of the slide, which is really kind of fantastic, but also sad a little bit. It reads, "Only girl architect lonely, wanted to meet all of the women architects in Chicago to form a club," by Elizabeth Martini. This was a 1921 advertisement in a local newspaper that Elizabeth Martini had placed. At the time, she was actually the only woman licensed and practicing privately in Illinois. Martini was not the first woman to practice architecture in the area, but her ad underscores an overlooked chapter of Chicago architectural history. Women architects practicing and organizing in Illinois. And so, indeed, kind of the outcome of Martini's ad was actually the organization of the Chicago Women's Drafting Club, which in turn formed the Chicago Women in Architecture organization, which was founded in the 1970s and is still very much active today. It's actually one of the longest lasting associations of practicing women architects in the nation today. So I would look them up if you're interested, or if you're a woman practicing in the field. If you see me flip a slide, just, I guess, follow along if you can. So tonight, as I mentioned, I'll only be able to cover a few of the 100+ groundbreaking women who were pioneers in the field of architecture, interior design, real estate development, landscape architecture, beginning at the 20th century, or actually the end of the 19th century, and into the mid to later 20th century. As I mentioned, I'll provide a link at the end about how you can learn more about these women and others. But starting with our first woman, we're going to go to the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago.
Yes.
Let's go.
So while not an architect actually in Chicago, I felt really inclined to include our first woman, Sophia Hayden, as her design for the Women's Building at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition is kind of the first known building constructed or designed and constructed by a woman. So there may be others, just at this time it's kind of the one that we know about as the earliest. Sophia's career was only a few years, really like 2 to 3 years long. Played an important role in the profession at the moment when women were beginning to practice architecture in the United States. She was the first woman to receive a degree in architecture from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which going forward I'll just call MIT, and as the architect of the Women's Building at the 1893 fair. She drew attention to a small group of female architects pursuing academic training. On the slide, you can see this wonderful photo in 1888 of her posing with her T-square while in class at MIT. It was specifically taken, each woman kind of posed with a different tool of their trade, which I think is kind of fun. Following her graduation from MIT, Hayden began teaching mechanical drafting at the Elliott School, a grammar school in Boston that emphasized vocational education. It's not clear what professional openings may have been available to her in Boston, but a few months later she encountered the notice that would lead to her first architectural commission. On February 2nd, 1891, the construction department of the World's Columbian Exposition announced a competition for the design of the Women's Building, one of the exhibition halls to be constructed for the 1893 International Exposition in Chicago. The competition advertisement specified that only designs submitted by women would be eligible, and that each entry must have formal training in architecture. You can imagine that it was a very slim pool. Thanks for the laugh, Patty, knowing in advance. The competition advertisement specified that the building had to be 2 stories in height, rectilinear in plan, and designed in a classical style. Essentially what Burnham wanted for the World's Fair campus. Hayden was the winning entry and would be appointed as the architect of the Women's Building and would receive an honorarium of $1,000 for executing its working drawings. Her design won over 11 other submissions, all by women under the age of 25. A few well-known architects like Louise Bethune actually did not submit entries into the competition because she felt the $1,000 stipend was actually below what they should be paid, because also male architects, were submitting drawings, and they were getting a much higher than $1,000. So some women actually just didn't participate. So while 11 sounds very small, there were more women actually practicing in America than that. The Women's Building was one of the first fair buildings to enter into construction during the summer of 1891. And the fact that it actually finished on time and within budget suggests that Hayden had actually mastered the managerial aspects of the profession as well as the artistic ones. So at MIT, a lot of the coursework had focused on drawings and rendering, but also obviously learning about structures and construction and kind of running an actual architectural business. So clearly, A+ student for Hayden. Unfortunately for us, the building would be Sophia's first and last commission. But I also, I can only imagine how exhausting it would have been to kind of fight against and constantly deal with male architects. I don't know anyone else's profession here tonight, but Patty and I both work in the field, and it's exhausting. Continually dealing with it as a young woman in the field. Patty laughs because she knows. But regardless of Sophia's short-lived career, it paved the way for all the women featured this evening, including our next woman, Mary Mahoney Griffin. Woo!
Yes.
Marion was actually born in Chicago on February 14th, 1871. She was born to Jeremiah Mahoney, a journalist from Cork, Ireland, and Clara Hamilton, a school teacher. At an early age, she showed an aptitude for drawing and an interest in art fostered by her mother. She studied architecture at MIT, and in 1894 was the second woman to graduate from the school, just a few years after Hayden. Mahoney returned to Chicago as a draftsperson for her first cousin, Dwight H. Perkins, prior to beginning work at Frank Lloyd Wright's studio in 1895. In 1898, she passed the new Illinois Architects Licensing Exam and became one of the first licensed women architects in the country. She remained in Wright's office on a regular basis until about 1904, and thereafter worked at irregular intervals until the studio was closed in 1909. In Wright's office, Mahoney designed furniture, the stained glass windows that Wright is most famous for, as well as decorative panels. She was also responsible for the creation of presentation drawings intended for publication and for prospective clients. For Wright, she created a rendering style partially influenced by Japanese prints, which Wright was most famous for collecting and kind of being enthralled by. And that rendering style would ultimately become the hallmark of the office for the following decade. What?
I said hell
yeah. We're very informal here. On occasion, Mahoney also took commissions outside of Wright's studio, including her now demolished design for All Souls Church, which was constructed in 1903 in Evanston, Illinois. And by September 1909, Wright actually had regulated his practice to Hermann von Holst, and left for a year-long residence in Europe. Wouldn't that be nice? Von Holst then hired Mahoney to serve as chief designer, which involved completing buildings under construction, finishing the design of other projects still on the drawing board, such as the E.P. Irving House, which you'll see in a minute, in Decatur, Illinois, and the Adolf Mueller House, there we go, also in Decatur in 1909. And also in several cases, she created entirely new houses, including the Robert Mueller House, also in Decatur. All these houses are on the same block, and it's this beautiful, Marion Mahoney block in Decatur, Illinois. Sorry, it's not Chicago, but I had to show them. So for the three residences in Decatur, Mahoney actually convinced von Holst to hire Chicago architect Walter Burley Griffin in 1910 to create a landscape plan. And that's right, she hired her future husband, essentially. Mahoney had known Griffin in Wright's studio, where he worked from 1901 to 1906. Following their renewed acquaintance, Mahoney and Griffin were married in May of 1911. You can find love in this crazy, awful field some days. No, just kidding. Mahoney then joined Griffin's practice, where she created a new presentation format, which included interior and exterior perspective renderings, combined with floor plans on a single united design. She also developed a technique of lithographing these on ink on linen images to satin finish silk, to which she applied watercolor washes. In Griffin's office, she also designed architectural ornament and decorative art objects and served as a natural sounding board for Griffin during the design process. The solid rock house, which is in the top right corner of the slide, is actually in Winnetka, Illinois, and Marion is responsible for the design of the windows influencing kind of the overall design. Unfortunately, that house is slated for demolition. And I had the privilege of going through it beforehand and kind of writing on the history of it. But again, that goes back to the advocacy piece I mentioned earlier, and I'll mention again later. In May 1912, Walter won the international competition for the new capital city of Australia, Canberra, in part due to the strength of Mahoney's renderings. Griffin traveled to Australia in July 1913 for 5 months to consult on construction of the city, while Mahoney oversaw the Chicago office and completed the projects. While in Australia, Griffin was offered a 3-year contract to continue his work. In the following year, the Griffins departed Chicago to establish their home in Melbourne. Mahoney briefly returned to Chicago in 1925 and in 1932. During one of those trips, she actually designed a mural for Chicago's George Armstrong Public School. Mahoney would then return for the final time following Walter's death. And when she returned to Illinois and Chicago, she threw herself into writing the 1,600-page unpublished personal biography of herself and Griffin entitled The Magic of America. So I would highly recommend. All right, get out.
1,600?
Yeah, 1,600. The Magic of America. And it's a nice idealism, so moving on to Elizabeth Martini, which came very close after Mahoney and was almost a colleague in Chicago if Mahoney had not moved to Australia with her husband. Elizabeth was actually born in Brooklyn, New York in 1886 and grew up in Massachusetts. She studied at the Pratt Institute and Columbia University before moving with her family to Illinois in 1909. In her first year, she was rejected by 90 architectural firms due to her gender until finding a position as a secretary. In 1913, she received her architectural license from the state of Illinois, being only the second woman ever licensed in the state, and the following year opened her own practice, obviously the first woman being Mary Mahoney Griffin. Elizabeth actually practiced under her initials, E.A. Martini, assuming that she received more inquiries if she did not use her name Elizabeth, even being referred to as a he in the Chicago Tribune. Elizabeth continued her practice in Chicago until 1934, at which time she moved to Bangor, Michigan. While in Chicago, as I mentioned, Martini ran the following newspaper advertisement in a hope to meet other women in the field. And again, it read, "Only girl architect lonely, to meet all the women architects in Chicago to form a club." And in 1921, she founded the Chicago Drafting Club, one of the first organizations for women architects and a precursor to the Women's Architectural Club, founded in 1927. Many of Martini's works were for single-family residences across the Chicagoland area. She was one of 3 winners of a 1917 farmhouse design competition sponsored by the Illinois Board of Agriculture and the Illinois chapter of the AIA. And she regularly contributed articles to Better Homes and Gardens magazine. I really kind of wonder sometimes, I think of Better Homes and Gardens magazine today. I really wonder what it was like in 1917. It must have been very different. Very different. In addition to her residential designs, which were featured, Martini was also responsible for the design of a few factories and warehouses, which if anyone has seen any other of my lectures knows how much I love industrial architecture. So I love this. She designed the A. Alexander Bauer Construction Co., which you can see on your slide, which is actually in the River North neighborhood at 230 West Superior, as well as religious works, including her most prominent design for St. Luke's Lutheran Congregation in Park Ridge. She designed their sanctuary and education wing, and she was actually a member there and taught children in the Sunday school. kind of continuing with our women, and I know we're Chicago for Chicagoans, but kind of lumping Chicagoland in here. Following Elizabeth was Bertha Louise Yerix Whitman. Also, born in Michigan in 1892, Bertha studied at the University of Michigan, becoming the first female graduate of the College of Architecture and Design, despite being told by the dean of the program, "We don't want you." Yeah, I know. After graduation, she moved to Chicago and worked for the firm of Perkins, Fellows, and Hamilton, where she was one of 2 women completing drafting work for the firm. She received her architectural license in 1926 and subsequently began doing independent commissions for private home buyers. In 1927, Bertha was one of the 9 founders of Elizabeth Martini's Club, the Women's Architectural Club of Chicago. The club was active into the 1940s when it merged with AIA. In 1931, one of her homes also won a Better Homes contest for its unique, convenient arrangement of rooms and stairways. The design was featured in the architecture display at the 1933 World's Fair. During the Great Depression, Bertha supplemented her residential work with a job for the state of Illinois as a social worker, and later would become responsible for a staff of designers and draftsmen who remodeled the state offices.
Wait, so architect having a side hustle as a social worker.
And then remodeled the state offices. And I'm sorry, my phone keeps going off, so that just goes on the floor now. Bertha is known for her single-family residences, designing at least 60 homes over 40 years throughout Chicago and the North Shore, and commissioned by individual families and or developers. The residences featured are just a small percentage of her works that have been documented, but showcase her work designing residences in a variety of styles, including the traditional revival styles of the early 20th century to the more contemporary minimal traditional style prominent by the mid 20th century. Next, I want to talk about Beverly Lorraine Green. Regarded as the first documented African American woman architect licensed in the United States, Beverly received her architectural license in the state of Illinois in 1942. We have a lot, and it's kind of like so unfortunate that we're now in the mid 20th century and we still have firsts happening, but we'll get there. Green was actually born in Chicago in 1915. She attended the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and received a degree in architectural engineering in 1936. She was also the first African American woman to earn this degree from the university. A year later, she earned a master in city planning and housing. After graduation, she actually went to work for the Chicago Housing Authority in 1938, where she was one of the first, again, African Americans hired by the agency, and where she stayed until 1945, at which time she actually moved to New York to work on a housing development with the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. After a few days, though, she quit and chose to pursue a master's in architecture at Columbia University. While at Columbia, she took a job with the architectural firm of Isidore Rosefield, designing health facilities until 1955. Very little is known about Green's time at the Chicago Housing Authority and her work in Illinois. I've actually reached out to the Chicago Housing Authority, just seeing if they keep any archives on personnel and the projects they worked on, and unfortunately they don't keep those detailed records. So we know slim to none about which housing development she is actually responsible for. We've been able, though, to kind of narrow down a few possible projects that she might have worked on at CHA just based on the time period while she was at CHA. Some of those may include the Ida B. Wells homes, Lathrop homes, Altgeld Gardens, and the Cabrini Green homes. Her career after Illinois, though, is prolifically documented, and we know that she went on to collaborate independently with prominent architects to design works including the UNESCO headquarters in Paris, which is, those 2 photos are from the headquarters, actually working with Marcel Breuer on that design. She also designed at Sarah Lawrence College, the Arts Complex, a theater at the University of Arkansas with architect Edward Durrell Stone, and multiple buildings on the University Heights campus of New York University. One woman, our next woman, got her start in Chicago, but we lost her to Indiana. I don't know what we did wrong. Sorry if anyone's from Indiana.
We're all sorry.
Yeah. We have Juliet Alice Peddle, and I love this photo. I love this photo of her. I don't know why. It's like I wish I could climb a tree like her and look that like awesome. Currently, I've been able to find very little about Peddle. While her career in Indiana is well documented, again, her work and time in Illinois is not. She was born in 1899 in Indiana, and Peddle learned how to draft at an early age from her father, who taught machine design. She graduated from the University of Michigan in 1922 and was also one of the co-founders of the Women's Architectural Club here in Chicago, also a contemporary of Bertha Louise Urix Whitman, who attended University of Michigan. After graduation, she moved to Chicago, where she worked for a number of architectural firms, again, including Perkins Fellows in Hamilton with Whitman, and the office of Edwin Hill Clark. During the Great Depression, she worked as a draftsperson for the Historic American Building Survey on many of the same buildings as Mary Ann Elizabeth Crawford, which we'll talk about in a minute. And with this, as a woman who owns a historic preservation architecture firm, there we go, as the historic preservation specialist, it's kind of cool because the Historic American Building Survey is still a thing, and if you've never looked at any of the records in the Library of Congress, a lot of them are online, and I've actually been able to find some of Crawford and Peddle that they did in the 1930s, and I still do HABS documentation today. Unfortunately, when they were doing it, it was a WPA program. When I'm doing it, I know the building's going to be demolished, and it hurts a lot. They were just doing it to have a job, and Roosevelt, created the WPA program to create kind of jobs during the Great Depression, and the HABS program came out of that. And they were just kind of documenting them for fun. I have to document them for regulatory reasons, so it's not as exciting. Unfortunately, she moved back to Indiana in 1935, where she opened her own architectural firm and practiced for the next 30 years. Her only two known works in Illinois are the George Mitchell residence and the Paul Martin residence. They're both located in the Oak Crest subdivision of Marshall, Illinois. Unfortunately, we don't know of any projects that she completed in Chicago beyond just working in those firms. Haven't been able to track down any of her work through the archives of those firms yet. Those two residences in Marshall were constructed in 1958 and in 1959. Peddle was also known for her drawings in holiday cars, which is in the bottom left of the slide. And I don't know. Again, I wish I could draw like that. I can't. Not at all. I had to, and my background is in interior design, and when I had to do a graphic rendering class, no, not at all. Not my strong suit at all. Our next woman, Po Hu Xiao, was born in Shanghai, China. Po began her architectural studies and career in her home country, first studying at the National Central University in Taiwan and receiving her bachelor's in architecture in 1941. She actually then went on to teach at the university from 1941 to 1946. She moved to the United States in 1949 after being awarded the Barber Scholarship for Oriental Women. I realize that it may not be politically correct now. That's just the name of the scholarship by the University of Michigan. A scholarship awarded to outstanding women with the intent that they would study at the University of Michigan and then return to their home countries with the knowledge and skills they obtained to better the lives of those who live there. Po never returned home, though, and formally immigrated to the United States in 1952. after graduating and working in the architectural firm of William Edward Capp in Detroit between 1949 and 1952. She moved to Chicago by 1958 and joined the firm of Lobel, Schlosselman, and Bennett, where she remained for a majority of her career, designing buildings across the Midwest. That speech impediment from my childhood, sometimes it sneaks back up and things like that. So I can't escape it. In Illinois, her significant works focused on private residences like the Saul Sherman Residence in Winnetka, educational projects including Mather High School and Deerfield High School, for which she won an award from the American Association of School Administrators in 1961. She also designed recreational buildings like the Harriet M. Harris Park District building for the Chicago Park District, as well as healthcare facilities and offices. Outside of Illinois, she had educational commissions from Beloit College in Wisconsin and private residences, including the Winton Place apartment building in Lakewood, Ohio. Gin and tonic time. Sorry.
Yes, drink faster. It's not even time for a refill yet.
All right, 2 sips. 2-sip time. Next, we'll discuss Mary Ann Elizabeth Crawford, who I mentioned earlier as a colleague of Juliet Peddle. Mary Ann practiced architecture and engineering. If this is not like one of the smartest women ever, I don't know.
Wow.
For nearly 60 years, and it was really only until the last decade of her life that she received considerable attention for her designs and drawings. She was a native of Illinois, born in 1901, and grew up in Girard. At the age of 5, her father realized her talent and purchased her art supplies and enrolled her in art classes. I love this story, it just gets me too. 6 years later, she helped design the family home in Montgomery County, translating her and her family's design ideas to the architect in Chicago. She was 11 at the time.
Wow.
She began her studies at the University of Illinois in 1919, but later had to drop out due to a family emergency. She then transferred to MIT, graduating in 1929 and receiving her master's in 1930. During the Great Depression, Mary was a stenographer for the architectural firm of Hullibird and Root, also a very random, like Bertha Louise Yerix Whitman, who became a social worker. Mary Ann proofread maps for Rand McNally. I guess it was just anything that, would pay during the Great Depression. But she was also a draftsperson, as I mentioned, for the Historic American Building Survey until 1943. In the 1930s, she also served as the chair of the Women's Architectural Club and later as an officer for the Society of Western Engineers. In 1941, Mary received her architectural license and began working independently on industrial, commercial, and residential commissions. 2 years later, she became a professional engineer, and I do not know how she did it in 2 years. Her most prominent work is the headquarters and manufacturing facility for the Lindbergh Engineering Co. in Chicago. Again, near and dear to my heart, industrial architecture and also art buildings designed by women. Additionally, she worked on a number of interior remodelings for private residences and offices, designed the tombstone for Amy Irwin McCormick, and worked on the remodeling of private suites and the Green Room restaurant at the Bismarck Hotel, which is now actually the Kimpton Hotel Allegro on Randolph Street in the Loop. None of her work is there, unfortunately. I have checked, but it's still kind of interesting to know that history. Pictured here, you can see not only the Lindbergh Engineering Co., but also a wonderful photo of Mary Ann standing in front of the front door of the building. It looks exactly like that today, and it's perfect. So if you actually commute on or ever ride on Metra's Milwaukee District or North Central lines, or have taken Amtrak's Empire Builder out towards the Pacific Northwest, or the Hiawatha lines, there's a lot of trains that run by here. So I'm sure everyone has possibly taken a train past this building. It is located directly across from the Western Avenue station. So, yeah, Western and Hubbard. Next, as I mentioned earlier, we have Georgia Louise Harris Brown, considered to be the second African American woman to become a licensed architect in the United States. Brown was born in Topeka, Kansas in 1918. From an early age, she showed an artistic and mechanical aptitude while working on cars and farm equipment with her older brothers. In 1938, she went to visit her brother in Chicago and attended a summer course at IIT taught by none other than Mies van der Rohe. Between 1940 and 1944, she attended the University of Kansas to receive a degree in architecture, becoming the first African American woman to earn the degree in the history of the university. Again, we're still 1940s and getting first, unfortunately. Brown returned, though, to Chicago the following year in 1945 and began working at the architectural firm of Kenneth Roderick O'Neill, where she stayed until 1949. That year, she received her architectural license and then took a job with Frank Cornacker and Associates. Brown learned to speak Portuguese by studying with a friend on her off time and permanently moved to Brazil by 1954, not returning to the States until 1995. One of her reasons for leaving the United States was because opportunities for advancement were limited by her race. And in Brazil, there would be fewer racial boundaries for her to succeed. While working in Chicago, though, Brown left us with some amazing buildings. She was responsible for the structural calculations on a number of prominent buildings constructed in the 1940s and in the early 1950s, including the Promontory Apartments in 860-880 Lakeshore Drive, both designed by Mies van der Rohe, as well as the now demolished Prairie Court Apartments by Keck and Keck. Yeah, she did that. And she does not have her own section in the landmark designation report, but that's fine. Let's see how it is. Thanks to my hype person up front. Thanks, Lou. And as we kind of leave the architects and the engineers and the designers, there's someone who comes before all of them, and that's the developer. As part of this project that I've been able to be involved with, we have been able to identify a number of pioneering women developers, including a few that I'll talk about tonight. Starting with Emma Kennett. An Illinois native, Kennett was born in February 1891. We don't have much information on Kennett's first 3 decades, but by the time she was 32, which I feel like such a slacker because like my age, she was operating the Kennett Construction Company and building picturesque flat buildings in the Tudor and Spanish revival styles across Chicago's far north side communities, predominantly in Rogers Park and like West Ridge area. Kennett designed all of her own buildings, assisted only by local architects, including Arthur C. Bucket and Herbert J. Rittker, to ensure that technical details were correct. So basically, they stamped the drawings, is what I'm hearing here. But she designed them. As for a contractor, Kennett partnered with actually one of the first African-American contractors in the city, Joseph Frederick Rousseau. Together, they did nearly $5 million in business over roughly 5 years, only splitting ways due to the Great Depression and a lull in development activity. Kennett was accomplished and successful despite a difficult and at times devastating personal life. At the beginning of the 1930s, her husband experienced a nervous breakdown. I mean, doesn't that still happen today? No. And entered into a sanitarium in California, financially supported by Emma. Good for her. Sorry, Lou, if that would have been it. You're on your own. He ultimately left the sanitarium and not long after was murdered after an encounter with what appears to be a serial killer. I don't know. I don't make these things up. Yeah, no big deal. A little early for Ted Bundy, but The following decade, then she lost her son, Captain James C. Kennett, in a battle in North Italy during World War II. Despite all of this, Kennett persisted and is known to have constructed over 80 multi-unit dwellings, so apartment flat buildings, in the Jarvis Ridge Howard area of Rogers Park, as well as some in Evanston. She would then go on to establish the Kennett Realty Company during the mid-20th century, building and selling model homes in the North Shore suburb of Lake Forest. By 1960, she decided to, see you later, Chicago. I'm going to Santa Barbara, California, where she became the proprietor of the historic El Encanto Hotel between 1961 and 1975. At which time it appears she finally retired at 84 years of age. And so we also have some preservationists, which is cool because she took care of this historic hotel for 15 years. Petal and Crawford were both documenting historic buildings through the Historic American Building Survey, which just warms my heart as a preservationist. It's kind of nice to just be able to look back and be like, okay, I think I'm doing the good work. I hope so.
You are.
Also, you do own your own firm at 32. I just want to.
Thanks.
Do better.
Humble. Okay, more gin and tonic. No. Moving on. While not considered a designer, architect, or engineer, I had included Elizabeth Wood in this database of women because she had a profound impact on the built environment, regardless of what her actual professional title was. Elizabeth Wood was actually the first executive director of the Chicago Housing Authority. She was born in Japan to missionary parents, and then at a young age they moved back to the States, and she grew up in Bloomington. Elizabeth studied at the Illinois Wesleyan University and at the University of Michigan, where she received a bachelor's and master's degree in rhetoric. For those who don't know, like me, because I didn't know what studying rhetoric was, studies in rhetoric instructed students in effective writing and oral communication. This degree was typically a precursor to a career in law, teaching, or public administration. So perfect for her. Following graduation, Elizabeth taught English between 1928 and 1932, before officially moving back and settling in Chicago, where she briefly worked for the Home Modernizing Bureau, a trade organization. When the trade organization collapsed during the Great Depression, Elizabeth's next move was to become a housing advocate and planner. She worked as a caseworker while studying at the University of Chicago's School of Social Service Administration. By 1934, she was the executive director of the Metropolitan Housing Council, and a year later became the executive director of the Illinois State Housing Board.
Wow.
In 1937, Wood would then become the first director for the Chicago Housing Authority and would remain in that position for the next 17 years, only ousted by the First Daily. It's all political. It always is. Welcome to Chicago. I'm sure there's a lecture online on Chicago for Chicagoans about it. As executive director, Elizabeth pushed an agenda to provide high quality, low to mid-rise, racially integrated housing of architectural excellence.
Yes.
This is her idea, and it's great. Which would be equally distributed throughout the city. She worked closely with the Chicago Park District to ensure tenants had adequate recreation space and advocated for the construction of community and cultural facilities as part of the housing development. Those developments, regarded as her greatest accomplishments while at CHA, include the Jane Addams, Julia C. Lathrop, and Trumbull Park homes. Looking deeper at the development of a dozen other housing projects during Elizabeth's tenure, it's clear she also had a hand in so many more projects, including the Ida B. Wells homes, Cabrini and Green homes, and Elkgill Gardens. If you remember, that means she possibly overlapped also with Beverly Lorraine Green, which would just be the coolest thing ever if that could be confirmed. Wood was ultimately fired from CHA in 1954 due to her drive to integrate and maintain racial balance within housing developments, as well as ensure equal distribution of public housing throughout the city, and a city council that wanted none of that. You know, I think we all know Daley was racist. I think we all know that.
What?
I know. Wood would go on to work for the City Housing Authority and the Citizens Housing and Planning Council in New York City. And then from 1965 to 1972, she served as an advisor at the Department of Housing and Urban Development under the Johnson and Nixon administrations. Oh, thank you. I love it.
I think it's time for a drink break.
Yeah.
Drink break.
You gotta finish the first one.
I'm not, no, not trying. All right, 2 sips. Might be done. Woo! Thanks. The one other thing I want to say about Elizabeth Wood is, so recently Altgeld Gardens was actually a National Register of Historic Places nomination was completed. I had the privilege of reviewing it while I was vice chair on the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council, and I made sure Elizabeth Wood got her due credit in that nomination. So we have one nomination that recognizes a woman in this field. Yes, that's one. It's a start, but you know. Our next and last developer is Mary E. Willis. Much of what I know about Willis comes to us from the Chicago Bungalow Association, courtesy of the research and survey work completed by other amazing women in the field, Carla Bruni and Ellen Collig. Yeah. Born Mary Post in Wisconsin in 1862, she married Philip C. Willis in 1888 and had one child, a daughter named Frances. By 1910, Mary and her family are living on Chicago's north side and were renting an apartment with 6 other lodgers. I cannot even imagine in like one of our typical Chicago apartments living with like 9 people. I cannot. Yes. Yeah. Philip was an entrepreneur who started his own pest management business. And I kind of have to like question if this has to do with his untimely death. I like can't really imagine like what pesticides looked like in 1910, and it's not my area of expertise. So if anyone knows later, please let me know.
Not good.
Yeah. Nevertheless, not good. Nevertheless, it was shortly after Philip's passing that Mary realized her own entrepreneurial drive. At this time, it was still unusual for a woman to be working, and on top of that, to be working outside of the home or not working as clerical staff. I don't want to do that. Sorry. The 1920 census documents Mary's success, and by this time she is listed as a real estate agent and living in her own home and no longer in a small flat with her family and 6 other boarders. Based on the research completed by Carla and Ellen, Mary built more than 60 homes and buildings, the majority of them in Portage Park, on the 4600 and 4700 blocks of North Laramie, the 4600 block of North LeClaire, the 5000 and 5100 block of West Wilson Avenue, the 5000 and 5100 blocks of West Windsor Avenue, and the 4600 block of North Lawler Avenue, all constructed within a 8-year time period from 1913 to 1921. I also now, like, reading my notes, because I couldn't remember any of this otherwise, but, like, seeing it written, like, I have to wonder if she was, like, superstitious about these numbers, because they're all the same. 46, 47, 46, 50, 51, 50, 51, 46. Like, I feel like she was really preferential to these numbers for some reason. Or other people were superstitious and didn't want those block numbers. I don't really know. The majority of her homes were the ubiquitous Chicago bungalow, and like many developers of the time, Mary would buy up a row of lots along a street and develop them simultaneously for efficiency. She hired local architects including Ernest Brocher, Walter Heimbeck, and Charles Wheeler to complete the designs. By 1930, though, she made her fortune, and Mary is retired and living with her daughter Frances and her second husband Elmer. She got out right before the Great Depression, which is like good for her. And then after the developers, the designers, the architects, the engineers, we cannot forget the landscape architects who kind of wrap these buildings in beautiful, nice little bows and packages. We'll start with pioneer landscape architect and designer Gertrude Eisendrath Demel-Koo. What a name. Born in 1893 in Racine, Wisconsin, Gertrude moved to Chicago with her family at the age of 6. As a young adult, she began her college education at Sweetbriar College in Virginia in 1912, but transferred to the Lothrop School of Landscape Architecture in Massachusetts, from which she graduated in 1917. While in school, Koo apprenticed with landscape architect Ellen Biddle Shipman, before being then hired at the office of Francis Robinson in Des Moines, Iowa. She returned to Chicago in 1921 and started her own practice. Her first designs were for private gardens in Pennsylvania, where she had family connections. Over the next 50 years, Koo designed over 400 landscaping projects and gardens. Too many, many of these with her associate Mary Long Rogers, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I've bolded just the list of some of the projects. I've bolded the ones that were with Mary Long Rogers on the slide. Koo's works focused on both plantings for new construction and redesigns of existing landscaping, when many large estates through Chicago's north suburbs were first being subdivided into smaller lots. In the 1930s, she designed several gardens for shoe manufacturer Irving Florsheim's estate in Libertyville, Illinois. She was also so well established by 1940 that she was often hired before the project architect, with the understanding that she would assist in choosing the actual architect. I mean, if that is not like the epitome of clout, I don't know what is. By 1950, Koo was working with Mary Long Rogers, designing over 200 landscapes throughout their 25-plus year collaboration. Although most of her work was residential, Koo completed commissions for several hospitals and religious institutions, including the Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago. I'm on my last woman, so I feel like I need to finish this drink and have another one for Q&A. But no chugging. At this time, we know very little about Mary Long Rogers' professional career and even less about her personal life. I don't know what's happening. I'm just ignoring it. Rogers' career appears to have begun when her and her husband established the firm of Rogers & Rogers, where they consulted to a number of architectural firms and planning boards during the 1930s and 1940s. By the 1950s, Rogers became an associate to Koo, a collaboration that would continue for nearly 3 decades. In addition to the selection of over 200 landscape designed by Koo and Rogers, Rogers' earlier work appears to have also had a focus on urban planning, including a redevelopment plan for Chicago's near West Side community, the official plan, for Taylorville, Illinois, which I am going to admit, I don't know where Taylorville, Illinois is. So if someone knows, also open to learning, which essentially can be equated to a comprehensive plan today, and a preliminary survey of the Calumet Industrial District, which again, if anyone has heard me talk on the Central Manufacturing District, the Calumet District was their 6th and final tract that was never developed, and it's just so interesting to me to see how all of these things overlap over the course of history.
Yes.
So I would say this presentation just begins to scrape the surface of the women who built, developed, contributed to the built environment of Chicago and obviously Illinois. And I would just suggest, I had mentioned Landmarks Illinois earlier. The entire Women Who Built Illinois database is on their website as the Women Who Built Illinois database. So it's just www. If you even you don't even need to type that in. Landmarks.org. Landmarks.org. It's very easy. It's on the final. I did put it on the final slide. Yes. So you can take a picture, take the PowerPoint with you. If you're online, just click it now. but it's under their surveys. And so it has a full searchable database of over 100 plus women, architects, engineers, landscape architects, real estate developers, even urban planners, and as I mentioned earlier, even clients that contributed greatly to the design of a certain project. So instead of like, I don't know, I find myself doom scrolling sometimes in this day and age. So maybe instead of like doom scrolling through like awful TikToks, like doom scroll through all these lovely women and all of the amazing work they did in Illinois. And obviously if you ever come across any or know of any now, I am open and all ears and would love to know more if they're not already included in the database. And I'm hoping we can continue to extend the database. We started this in 2018 or 2019. So our cutoff was like 1979 at the time, which for anyone who's familiar with kind of preservation standards, we were following a 50-year cutoff, which is like buildings become significant or historic after 50 years or older. And then planning for a decade out, but obviously it's now been 3 years, so we kind of need to start kind of extending that time period. And so looking to continue to work on it, but also open to, if you know, like I said, if you know about anyone, love to hear more. So that's what I got.
Questions. Anybody got a question? Yes, you said back.
Erica,
Yeah.
fabulous,
Thanks.
really interesting stuff.
Thank you.
The topic itself, I think, begs the question. Women, developers, architects, and so on. Is there something that's typified, something a little different, something that you could say about these developments, maybe a little bit different than some of the other developments in architecture and so on?
Try to repeat the question.
Sure. So the question is there something I can say about how these developments by the women architects, builders, developers differentiate from your typical architectural design of the time period? Unfortunately, I cannot say anything to that degree. Really looking at the designs that these women completed, they did follow the popular style or revival style of the time. I can only assume, and this is not a fact, but I can only assume that it was already difficult for these women to get commissions because they were women in the field. And I think if anyone would have stood out beyond what was popular at the time, it probably would have been even harder to get commissions. So many just designed in what was the popular architectural style at the time. So Bertha Louise Whitman is designing in Tudor Revival, Colonial Revival, and then later on in minimal traditional. I know. No one knows what that is probably, but that's fine. I can explain it afterwards. And then Mary Mahoney Griffin is obviously designing in very popular prairie school style of the time. Unfortunately, there's nothing above and beyond. And it's not that I don't think these women would have not designed kind of something different, but it was just very hard to already get commissions. I mean, I think one woman we could look at is Elizabeth Wood, obviously not professionally or trained as an architect or interior designer, but was striving to do something different within the Chicago Housing Authority system. And we can look to her as an example of what would have happened because she was fired from her position because she was striving for something better and different than what was being designed by kind of the male-dominated field and the male-dominated political system at the time. So I think maybe we can look to her as someone who designed something different, but also look to her as, what would have happened if you designed outside of what was popular. I hope that answers the question.
Woo. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah.
So a lot of these women, the way you kind of explained it, they either worked in sequence or worked, around the same time period.
Mhm.
Are there any direct references to each other in their work?
There's no, so the question is, a lot of these women worked around the same time period or of each other, and is there any direct references to each other in their work? There is no direct reference to each other in their work. The only reference that I found where two women specifically worked together was one, Bertha Louise Yerkes Whitman and Juliet Alice Peddle worked in the same office together, but there's no reference in terms of their designs to each other. And then Juliet Alice Peddle also specifically worked with Mary Ann Elizabeth Crawford when they were completing historic American building surveys. But for anyone who's not familiar with that program, I lightly touched on it, but essentially it's documenting existing buildings. So doing measured as built drawings, doing large format film photography, and creating a written narrative on the history and the architectural design of that building. So they're documenting something that's already existing and not designing anything new. Oh God. Okay, you second, Patty. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if you have a favorite or one that sticks out of you of the works that you mentioned today, or like that are on the PowerPoint.
Yeah. I think my favorite is probably Mary Ann Elizabeth Crawford, and specifically her work at the Lindbergh Engineering Company. It's one that, like, if I had any political pull in this city, I would want to see landmarks. It's just something of that size, scale. It's just really impressive. And then as someone who is also interested in industrial architecture, it's something that I would have never, ever thought that, like, a woman architect in the early 1940s would have been hired to do that, because it's so atypical. So I think it's a really unique structure and has a unique history. And like I said, just on top of that, I love industrial architecture. So to be able to have that connection, and I had actually, I completed a survey for the city a few years back, and I surveyed most of the Kinsey Industrial Corridor, which was like 806 buildings. And the Kinsey Industrial Corridor goes from Lake Street on the south, Grand Avenue on the north, and then Ogden on the east, and to Sacramento on the west. So a very large area. And I had first found out about this building during that project, but it was just like a deeper and deeper dive, just like in kind of combining all of my interests and all the things I care about in the city. I think that would be my favorite one. And I'm sorry, I didn't repeat the question. So for those listening at home, the question was if I have a favorite, or kind of like most connected with woman or design. Patty had a question.
I did. So a lot of these women worked in housing or with housing or designed houses. Do you think that was because the prevailing thought was women belonged in the home, so that was probably what they were most capable of designing? Do you think they chose it? Do you think they got pigeonholed? What's your educated guess?
Sure. So the question from Patty was, do a lot of these women design housing, worked in kind of a housing authority, and if I think they were kind of pigeonholed into designing housing or chose it themselves. but pigeonholed because typically at the time women were expected to be in the house. I don't know what other way to say it, unfortunately. So I think my opinion is, and this is just my personal opinion, I think they were pigeonholed into designing housing because kind of keeping house was seen as something a woman mother would do. It was, I feel like, probably easier for them to get commissions for single family residences because that's the building type that people can most associate with women. I mean, even looking to Elizabeth Martini, she used her initials to get commissions because she would not get commissions as a woman unless she was, designing homes and recognized in Better Homes and Gardens as Elizabeth. But her design, the permit for the industrial building on Superior Street was E.A. Martini. It wasn't Elizabeth A. Martini. She was using her initials for those buildings that weren't residences. So I do think that people were more comfortable hiring women for residential designs instead of commercial or industrial. I think the outlier there is Georgia Louise Harris Brown, because while she was designing residences, for Mies van der Rohe, and technically they're residences, they're very different than, what you think of as your typical single family residence. I mean, these are high-rise buildings, and she did a lot of calculations for high-rise buildings. I think there's one on Lunt and Rogers Park that, again, this is like a mid-rise, but it's different than what your single family home is. And so I think that's kind of the one outlier to that.
Other questions? Don't be shy.
I have a comment and a question.
Okay.
First of all, great talk.
Thank you.
And a wonderful topic for month of March.
Yeah.
We celebrated International Women's Day last week.
Yes.
So women.
Yeah.
Women in construction.
So my question is, today, what is in the architectural profession? What is the ratio between female and male architects? Is it still male dominated or pretty even now? And also, the fact you're in that space, I'm just curious, what are we looking at?
Sure. So the question is the field of architecture still male dominated versus female dominated? What's the ratio, and what does that interaction look like? So unfortunately, it is still very much male dominated. There are more women entering the field, but not enough to kind of balance the ratio. In terms of what it looks like being in the field as a woman, not good. It still is very much specifically as a young woman. Maybe when I'm older, it'll be a different perspective. But as a young woman in the field, you're very much not listened to, not taken seriously. I've been on, projects where, as I mentioned earlier, I'm part of a emerging professionals organization, and I've actually, as part of that organization, we try to do volunteer preservation projects. And we've actually had to walk away from some projects because contractors that are older men, don't want to listen to you. They don't consider you as an expert in the field. They don't take you seriously. They make, snide comments about you all the time. I mean, even today, my coworker had a situation where she was filling in for me on a field visit, and they're not communicating with her like they're supposed to be, per the reason why we're actually on the field visit. So unfortunately, it's still very hard to operate, especially as a young woman in the field. And I would like to say some jobs it's definitely not that way, but then there are those jobs where you kind of have your typical white older male who just doesn't want to listen to you or take you seriously, unfortunately.
still have a way to go, huh?
Yeah. Yes, we do.
We had a question on this.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the very, very first question, and then I was thinking that I feel like a lot of designers kind of have their dreams, hopes, and desires on sketchbooks or writing,
Yeah.
and I was wondering if any of these kind of filled what was needed or like wanted in their professional work, but if any of them wrote anything, if they were writers, if they kept if they wrote a manifesto of their design philosophies or anything like that, or they
Sure.
thanks,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
typical though,
yeah.
okay?
So the question was if any of the women featured tonight, I'm gonna pare this
Yeah,
down.
that's
Sorry.
fine.
Wrote anything and kind of wrote a manifesto about their design philosophies and concepts. And I don't know of any of them that wrote about their design philosophies or concepts, but Mary Mahoney, as I mentioned, did write the magic of America. Yeah, and that kind of that's the only one that I have found that has written anything. Mary Ann Elizabeth Crawford was much more into, and I think a lot of these women were like into renderings.
Yeah.
And kind of express themselves. So Julia Alice Petal was into sketching and renderings and did holiday cards and just note cards. And whereas Mary Mahoney Griffin also did that, but when she needed to find a purpose, kind of after she had somewhat lost everything after Walter Burley Griffin died, and I think predominantly because she was distraught by his death, she closed his India office. I mean, they had moved from Australia to India. She was distraught that she had to close the India office, and then she came back and kind of had to get that off, and then wrote The Magic of America. Read it. I think it's cool.
I'm surprised you didn't read her shade for Frank Lloyd Wright.
I'm working on a Frank Lloyd Wright building right now, so I got to be careful what I say.
Last questions, anyone? Yeah, we
Yeah.
got one more back here.
So, from my understanding, Mary Mahoney Griffin did a lot of the stained glass work for Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah.
Every time I see it in like an art space, it's attributed to Wright. Why?
Sure. So the question is, the understanding is that Marion Mahoney Griffin did a lot of the design for Frank Lloyd Wright's stained glass windows, but every time it's interpreted as it was designed by Wright. The only thing I can say is that Wright had an ego, and again, a lot of people attribute a lot of things to him that were not actually designed by him, and so it's one of those. I mean, even this house in Winnetka that I worked on, it was all attributed to Walter Burley Griffin, and then later for an addition to Francis Berry Byrne. A lot of the times, just we haven't caught up, and by we I mean those institutions that are interpreting Wright's works have not caught up yet to interpreting the work that actually Mary Mahoney Griffin has contributed. I think institutions, I mean, we have a lot of obviously like house museum type institutions around Frank Lloyd Wright. I think just like other institutions that are trying to do a better job on interpreting the life of a maid or a live-in servant, and some of these institutions are also trying to catch up and do a better job of interpreting actually who designed these aspects that are attributed to Wright. So with Solid Rock, the house in Winnetka, nothing was attributed to Mary Mahoney Griffin. And then, I sit down with, one of the lead members of the Walter Burley Griffin Society of America, which, what a name. I love it. And it just like, kind of talking with him and interviewing him, it became very clear that he understands, that these are something that Mary Mahoney Griffin influenced, but the publication of that information is not readily available. It hasn't been, shared widely. It's just not there. And so that's why I think, like, back to that advocacy component I mentioned earlier in the evening, something that I really want to see is, like, and why I had suggested to Patty, like, yes, let's do this in March, this lecture. It's just, I want to see that information get out there more because it's not out there. And if it is, like, it's been so far buried by decades of misinterpretation of, for instance, rights designs, that it really needs to, it will be a long road to get it back out there to recognize Marion as she deserves.
All right.
No, you're fine.
Go, Patty.
Hell yeah.
I'm not working on any Frank Lloyd Wright projects, so I'm going to read Marion Moni Griffin's quote from her autobiography, widely believed to be about Frank Lloyd Wright. She was actually best friends with his first wife for a long time. So she was
the one he cheated on?
Yeah, the one he cheated on and left 6 children behind while he ran off with the neighbor's wife. The Chicago school died not only because of the cancer sore in it, one who originated very little but spent most of his time claiming everything and swiping everything. Again, this is the first woman licensed to practice architecture in the state of Illinois. Second woman to graduate from MIT. First employee of Frank Lloyd Wright, and she called him a cancer sore in her autobiography. So we'll print that on shirts someday. It's a deep cut, but that's what we're here for. Thank you guys again for coming out. Please, make sure to tip your bartender generously. Give it up for Will in the back. Woo! Again, we will not be doing this next week, but come back on the 31st for our final Women's Month lecture, if you will. We're almost to the tail end of our lecture series here. We only have 3 left. Again, we're talking about the crazy shenanigans in the McCormick family on the 31st, and the best one of all, Catherine Dexter McCormick. On Thursday, April 7th, we're talking about how Bronzeville invented the lottery, which will be a pretty awesome lecture. And our final lecture will be on Chicago's Lost Dime Museum. So come for the rest of our lectures, and make sure you hit that donation jar on your way out. Thank you guys.
Architecture firms still don't really credit this specific project.